This week on the Educational Triage podcast, we delve into what we've learned over the past 3 seasons and 140 episodes. Oh my gosh, there must be something in that little nugget that'll come out, right? Well, stay tuned. Let's take a look. This is the Educational Triage podcast. Welcome. We invite you to come along with us on an exploration of interviews, issues, and other exciting and relevant topics in education, especially alternative education. They say alternative education is a laboratory for mainstream education. Why? Well, join us every week and listen in as Philip Summers
Aloha.
and I, Tony Hunt, jump in feet first to discuss issues that may affect our classes, students, communities, as well as our teaching. Please subscribe if you enjoy and find relevance in what you experience here. And if you haven't left a quick review, please do. We appreciate your candor and insights so we can improve as we move forward. Now, let's see what's on board today. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Educational Triage podcast. This is Tony, and of course we have the galumphing, the prodigious Philip Summers.
Prodigiously galumphing. Aloha, good to be here.
How are you?
I'm doing well. It's a beautiful day. It's a fun topic. What could go wrong?
I have no idea. I have no idea. Autumn is sitting here. You can hear her probably.
No, can't hear the lovely Autumn, our co-host, our letter turner. There's Vanna and there's Autumn.
Well, Samson's just napping behind me. So for the last show of the season, what have we actually learned from all the episodes that we've done? If you take a look at everything we've had, just not necessarily even from the episodes, but just from having to process all the information.
Yeah, that's such an easy question.
It's not, though.
Not at all. No.
So why don't we start with you?
Oh, gosh. I've learned, let's see. Well, one of the things I have learned is to completely expand my view of what an education in general can be. As far as I would think that I was more inclined to try to salvage the present system that we have toward the beginning of this adventure we had. And now I'm not so sure that we don't throw the whole thing out in a lot of ways, the whole school system as we know it. And not to say that I have all the answers on what would replace it, but I'm a lot more imaginative about how to do that than I used to be. Just studying what learning is, how it's best done, what we've done to it, with all the pitfalls. And I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe the whole system's just sort of yesterday in many, many ways. That sounds maybe a little radical to say, but yeah.
I don't think so, but I think that you can't really throw something out without having something else to slip in its place.
Yes, I agree totally. You don't just toss things out. You need to transform them, involve them. Yeah.
And teachers tend to be, while they claim they want change, what they want are small things to change, not like a revolution. And I think what you're talking about is an absolute revolution, right?
I guess, that word's got a lot of stigma to it, but yeah, it's like a revolution, a complete reassessment of what we have and what we don't need or do need, and how to move forward. Yeah, it's revolutionary to say that school that we all grew up in and we all have fond memories of, and all that, go away.
It's outdated.
It's out. I think it's outdated. It just is. Yeah.
But you know what? I'm going to tag on to that, because what I was going to say is that I've learned that education is no longer about the kids.
Yeah.
Education, it's becoming more and more extremely about compliance.
Yeah.
And becoming part of a culture that follows the leader in many ways.
I think you're right. That was one of the biggest conclusions that supported my just thoughts of changing everything, is that it's serving the middle management and the upper management more than it's serving its customers, which are the kids.
Right. And this term has been used so much lately that it really has lost its actual meaning. I mean, and people use it wrong constantly, but it is a bit fascistic the way that it's being implemented at this time. So we
Yeah,
go back to the
a little,
Prussian
yeah.
model, where everybody needs to fall in line and it's a production line. We look at Horace Mann, who wants this. We look at John Dewey, who wants this. And right now we're seeing the outcomes of that very system that they wanted.
Right.
It has nothing to do with having I don't want to say a norms based, it has nothing to do with creating a cultural literacy that's shared. We've gone beyond that,
Yeah.
because people
Yeah.
become so angry about, why is this in the cultural canon and not this and this and
Yeah.
this and this. And it's not
I agree.
necessarily coming from those groups that they're saying can't adhere to this, but as a society. The problem with our society, and maybe Canada has the same thing, because we are nations of immigrants, is that we have we are a melting pot. And so we need to have a
Mhm.
cohesion. And
Yeah.
right now they are fracturing that and turning it into, I'll say right now, it's starting to look like a mosaic, but even the pieces of the mosaic, they want to pop those out and
Mhm.
replace them with something that doesn't quite fit with what's there.
I agree. It's
So we're
inappropriate.
having it's
Yeah.
we need to have a cultural awareness. We need to have people who can synthesize with other people, and I think people really want that. They want that feeling that they
Yeah.
all belong together, that togetherness. And it's looking back on, did you have to read Wuthering Heights in high school? Yeah, I did. I hated that book. And so that gives you something that you can,
Yeah.
a sense of camaraderie, a sense of shared suffering.
Yeah. Well, the thing, if you think about the whole political climate and how it's sort of peaked, everything's gotten to a fervor, and part of that fervor was showing up at school board meetings
Mm-hmm.
and ranting and raving about whatever it was that was outraging you. And they did it like for the kids. We're protecting the kids, but you could totally tell that these groups were putting the kids up as sort of a pawn, like, because of the kids, we have an agenda we're going to promote here. And, it was completely dismissing the whole reason schools exist at all, the kid, and putting their agenda front and center. I saw that actually myself at a school board meeting where there was a bunch of fervor, and it was around the January 6th incidents. And it was about a year later, I guess, but the Proud Boys were getting a lot of attention, and they were called white supremacist. Well, there are an awful lot of members of Proud Boys that are not white,
Mm-hmm.
including their leader who went to jail. However,
Yeah.
this was a non-white member that the school board, and when it came time to have his statement, he just stood up and said, "I'm part of this group, and it has been labeled a white supremacist group, and as you can see, I am not a white person, and I want that to be noted. Hey, thank you. It didn't say thank you. It said, "Oh, that be noted," and sat down. I went, well, that's interesting. My testimony at the school board meeting is completely unrelated to anything that has to do with the school. It's like, okay. I thought, well, good on you, buddy. I knew that, but you go.
But it seems as though we've become this nation of people who want their 15 minutes of fame, however
Yeah.
they can get it. And by God, they're going to
Yeah.
do it. They're going to do it by hook or by crook. If I go to a school board meeting, why do I have to tell people who I am if I am anybody
Right.
of anything? How does that further any debate or anybody's decision-making process?
Yeah, it just becomes a political storm sometimes, and it's like the last thing any
It's more
school needs.
self-serving, I think.
Yeah, it just creates the storm, and storms. Well, and the whole thing about Johnny can't read. We've ever since, like, just after World War II, about
Mm-hmm.
10 years, when things normalized and the world stopped smoking, it started to say, well, we're not number one, as if everything's a game and we're fielding a team. And so we decided that we were going to fix the American illiteracy problem, which truly didn't exist. I mean, it was progressing and there is some illiteracy, but it wasn't this declining mass of humans back into the Stone Age. And over all these years, the United States is known to innovate. I mean, we in the democratic Western nations sort of develop stuff, and then other nations manufacture it. In a lot of ways, those ideas came from that nation that was lagging completely behind everyone on the globe. It's strange. And by the measure of education, we were failing greatly.
What's interesting, I just saw this article the other day, and it said for an institution that prides itself on research, education lacks any interest in following through on what the research says in order to solve its problems.
Wow. That feels a lot. I don't have a hard time believing it. It seems to be in education, there is a disconnection between the acquisition of knowledge and the utilization of that very knowledge. They keep on beating the dead horse, like, we're behind in math scores. Well, maybe the math programs at school suck. No, they're just fine. We just suck behind it. We're going to have to make it work. It's like, but it's not working.
Well, the one thing I learned as program directors is that when you're given a budget, you darn well better spend your money, because if you don't, then you get in trouble for not spending that money.
That is true.
And so I remember we
Yeah.
had seed money, and this is at the one-room schoolhouse for the juvenile offenders.
Yeah. Oh,
We had
nice.
all
Okay.
this seed money, and they showed me how much money I was getting. Now, remember, how big would you say that one-room schoolhouse was, square footage wise? It had a small bathroom that also had a washer dryer that was stacked.
That's right.
And a tiny little kitchen that wasn't really, it was more of a
700 square
kitchenette.
feet tops.
750 at the most.
Seven is, yeah.
700. I would agree with 700 square feet.
Yeah,
tops.
700 tops.
So here I was, and I was given this huge 5-figure budget. I started shaking. I was petrified. I was just starting to stress out, because how am I going to spend that money?
Right.
And my assistant at the time, lovely lady, I'm going to go see her in August. She looked at me and she said, "Give me that." And I said, "Excuse me?" She said, "This is my job." She said, I'll figure out how we spend this. And I thought, okay. We
Yep.
ended up with brand new tables and chairs, which were sorely needed.
Yeah. That was
We had,
100,000 right there.
because we had already spent money on redecorating. And by redecorating, I mean, we were in there wallpapering and painting and doing all kinds of things, but we got new
Yeah.
equipment in there. And because it was so subpar, it was really depressing the way that it looked. And now things started to look like it was a school.
Yeah.
It was becoming a school. It didn't look like it was thrown together with little pieces and everything. We were able to take the kids out on field trips finally and do cultural things with them. So that was good. But then it was, if you don't spend the money, and I was going to be in trouble if we didn't spend the money.
Yeah. It was that, I know what you're talking about. That's that there's a certain fund because we were working with kids who had been adjudicated.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the it was in that state system, I believe, or there's also some
Right.
grant systems that were rolled in. I had a program that was a not residential like that one was, but it had the kids, they were transported over to the school itself,
Mm-hmm.
the old school. And so I had them and they lived in a house that was kind of a few miles away. And I got some money like that. And I got creative and I built a rock wall in the elementary school behind this old school we worked in. Yeah. And I was able to finagle that. A company out of Seattle that came down and we designed this rock wall 20 by 20. And I outfitted it with the ropes and the anchors. And I even had them drill anchors into the floors of the cafeteria so that I could put a prusik, which is a vertical rope straight up, and you could ascend the vertical rope using certain tools mountaineers would
Oh,
use.
cool.
And I used the heck out of that thing. And I taught everything under the sun on that: physics, science, history. And then we worked with kids in the elementary school. My high school kids in the class would mentor kids who'd come and climb on the walls and they would belay them. And it was serious, good fun. And it went away because eventually we had to study test stuff. We didn't have time for any of that stuff. We had to go to core classes because testing is important. And little by little, that wall to this day is just a nice thing that hangs in the cafeteria. And I don't even know if it gets used. It's just a crime. And it just went by the wayside. And
Well,
that's how I
the
spent
other
my money.
problem
It's
is
been great. Yeah.
the other thing I've realized is that education is a lot about ego.
You're right. It is a ton about ego. A lot of
And
sore toes.
a lot of I think it's a lot of butthurt
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's butthurt.
because
Yeah.
why did they get that and I didn't get that?
Right.
There's like all these people who feel as though they are like this. They should be the one that people do X, Y, and Z for. They should
Right.
be. And let me tell you, when I went into creating the new programs at the high school,
Yeah.
that raised our graduation rate by over 6%, which is huge.
Pretty much.
In fact, I think it was more like 8%. Um, the district was upset because people were upset that we found an effective, efficient way to get kids through the system where the kids actually
Yeah.
learned they had to do mastery, they had to do competency, and they were doing
Yeah.
it using the Common Core.
I was I was getting along with students in one of my positions, and I had an awful lot of busted egos around me. And I didn't realize it at the time, but they were floundering to kind of catch up to things, and they saw me after 20 years. Of course, things were a little bit smoother, but I made good relationships with students, and they'd check in for me, my appropriateness, and my relationships with students is just completely above board. But they did say at one point, "Well, you're just trying to be the cool teacher," and I'm like, No. I am the cool teacher. I didn't pay them to behave like that. They're doing that because I'm a cool teacher. It's like, sorry. They were upset. Well, you're just trying. No, it comes natural. Is that worse?
I had a teacher, a brand new teacher, a student teacher, come into my room. And I said, because they were told you should go into his room and see how he works with his kids.
Yeah,
And at the
oh,
time,
love
I was
that.
working with these kids. I was working with a very high mix of Russians and Latino kids
Uh-huh.
in the community. And we were, I think we might have been working on Julius Caesar or something. I don't remember. But anyway, so we were talking about
Nice.
it. We were going through, we were having a great time. I mean, it was fun. And
Yeah.
this, and
Julius
this,
Caesar's pretty heavy to go. Okay.
well,
Where's
this Joanna
escalating?
come lately looks at me after the kids leave and she said, I don't think I approve of your method of teaching. And I said, well, what's that? And she said, well, the students
Okay,
seemed unruly. I said, how so? Well, they weren't quiet. And I said, what's the point of having quiet students? We need to have discussions. You want them excited to be there. They're not there for us to spew crap at them.
right.
We're there so that they get involved and they take part, because that's what's going to help them remember what it is. And she said, well, I highly disagree. And I said, well, okay. So I was speaking to her master teacher, who I was working with on a presentation that we did up at the NCTE and Canadian Council of Teachers of English joint conference in Calgary. And I said, what gives? And she said, well, she's a lot of personality. And the only thing that's really keeping the kids in the seats when she's teaching is her mini skirts. And I thought, wow.
What?
She said, the boys are just like gaga because they're in love with her because she shows so much leg. Now, this was a woman who was telling me this, who was probably about 68 years old at the time. And I'm trying to think of how I was about 30.
I think I know that kind of woman that just will,
yeah.
Like, really? Yeah, good thing you said that.
Yeah, because I couldn't say it. But anyway, I thought, well, that's really interesting. She said she's just relying on her personality, but she's not going to get very far until she understands that you got to get the kids involved.
Well, yeah,
so
they're not quiet. Well, did their noise upset your sense of order? I mean, was this about your comfort level, or we were doing
the classroom
fine?
is
Did
not.
You notice the rapport?
Think of it this way. Let's try to think of it this way. What if every time that you invite the students in, because you invite them into your classroom,
right,
you're having some kind of a party.
right.
Now, it's not a tea party. It's not a birthday party, but it's a learning party. And what I learned recently, because I'm going to give a shout out to Giles Brandreth and Susie Dent, they do a podcast called Something Rhymes with Purple. And they go over the etymology of all these different words. And the idea of school, where does school come from? School comes from a place where you go, it comes from a place of relaxation. And learning was part of that relaxation. It's where you learn things because you're not working. You're relaxing and you're learning and you're having fun and you're playing and you're doing all these other things. So we don't have any concept of that anymore. So when my students come into the classroom, I want them to feel welcome, wanted, needed, and heard. I want them to know that they care and that I care about them and that I'm there to work with them and to help them and to kind of design things. So, what better way than to have games? And if you think of papers as a game, if you think of the reading as a game or as a challenge, to be quite honest, I'd never thought of it this way before, but it just suddenly came to me.
If school's central theme was a place of relaxation and that included learning,
right?
What we've done is we've taken our work patterns and schedules and imposed them upon humans that should be playing, but are not allowed to. They have to go to work. School's become a job. It's where they go. They have to go there. It's work. If you don't go there, you'll be fired. And by fired, I mean you'll run into serious problems. You have no choice. You must be there. That's not good enough to learn in. The fact that I must be there doesn't give me any incentive whatsoever to do anything there at all.
Now, I don't know if you were taught this, but we were taught that you needed to have there was good stress and bad stress, eustress, and bad stress. And
which is true.
The good stress would be just a little bit, and that was the anticipation that maybe somebody's going to call on you. But we've gotten it to a point now where the stress is now on the teacher in many ways, because we have to answer to students. We've got student behavior going on that parents aren't accountable for, that administration's not accountable for, and most definitely the student's not accountable for it. So the teacher is basically a punching bag for everybody to come after. And there needs to be a meeting in the middle on that. It can't be that nobody should be a punching bag, but there needs to be something in the center. And that needs to manifest. And it's not up to the teacher to create that manifestation. That's up to the administration. That's up to the school culture. That's up to the head honchos that are out there. It's
quite a cop-out to use the teachers as your front line of enforcement for things that the teacher doesn't necessarily believe in, and in many cases disagrees with ardently, but has no choice but to be the cop. Because they're the ones that are dealing with the child. God forbid an administrator be accountable to a student. God forbid that ever happen on the face of this earth, because that would mean the ultimate humiliation and degradation of that administrator. To relinquish any control to a student would upset them to the depths of their very souls.
I want you to think, in looking at successful schools, looking at successful programs, we know that administrators who spend more time in the classrooms, in the hallways, than in their office have better outcomes in their schools. There's generally a better sense of being in those schools all around. In fact, when we were talking about, I think it may have been when we were discussing absenteeism, the leadership role in having a strong leader being out there and engaging students, that was a critical element of what's needed as well. So why do we still have principals who basically hole up in their tiny little castle and never come out?
Because they're extremely busy doing the minutia that's been assigned to them to achieve some sort of targets that aren't maybe necessarily even relative. I mean, they're buried in work, so they're prevented from going and mingling too awful much anyway.
I disagree.
Then they've just accepted that as their role.
I disagree.
I don't know if they willingly wanted to do it.
But I disagree.
If they did, yeah. Oh, okay.
I disagree. I see a lot of principals who are effective managers who
Okay.
know how to get their work done. But then I see others, and I'm not
Oh,
going to say any names, who sit in their office and they are on their phone.
yeah.
They're dilly-dallying. They're doing all kinds of things so that they don't have to. They obfuscate all the work that they need to get done. Whereas if they actually
Oh,
focused on what they needed to do,
yeah.
then that would be done. But once again,
Yeah.
that has to do with ego,
And
because
bureaucracy.
some
Yeah.
of them find it demeaning to have to go out into the classrooms because now there's going to be expectations on them. And that's not their job, that's your job. So when I speak to principals and I say, okay, teacher shortage, if teachers are out, we can't get a sub, it would say a great deal to the staff if you and the other administrative staff were willing to go in and substitute maybe once or twice a week. And I was met with, not my job, that's your job. That says a great deal. And it
Yeah, it
sends a
does. You're
clear
absolutely right.
message. So I
Mhm.
I love the idea that principals need to recertify themselves as teachers every 7 years and go back in the classroom for a full year. They cannot touch anything administratively. It needs to be full-time teacher. And if their job is not opened up, then they go elsewhere or they figure something else out. If they can't get a teaching job in their own district, then that tells them something about their district, doesn't it?
Yeah, it certainly would, wouldn't it?
So it would send a clear line of communication. And maybe for some of them it would be a blessing. For others it might be a nightmare. But if administrators had to regain their touch and put their feet back on the ground, it would send a clear message and it would keep everybody a little more honest, I think. Now you're going to have people that argue with that, but I I really, really believe that we need people who don't think that they are above that. And we should not have people in administrative positions who have never taught a day in their life.
Never. No, never. Should never happen.
And yet we have them.
Yeah, we have a
And
lot of them. They've already,
there are
some
a
of them
lot of people,
specialized.
there are
Yeah.
tons of people out there who are licensed administrators who would make good administrators, but they can't get in because they don't fall into the right categories. And so if a district doesn't have enough of the right categories of what they feel are the right categories, I'm not going to go any further than that, then they go outside of that. And so I know of a district where they hired somebody with absolutely no educational experience, but they had managerial experience and they brought them in. And they walked in and they looked at it as a business and they started cutting stuff.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
the
yeah.
stuff for the kids. They were not kid oriented. There was nothing there, but they were hired because they could keep the budget.
Yeah, they could make the business work.
Right.
Schools aren't businesses.
Nope.
Yeah. I mean, if they were, they could get rid of their bad inventory. I mean, God knows sometimes there's a kid, I go, they're out of here. I don't know where you go. Just don't stay here. You're clearly not into this at all. But yeah, no, you can't do that. It's a human being. That's a person that you're dealing with.
Okay. So let's say that you are going to burn it down.
Hmm.
Give me a replacement.
I'll tell you, I wouldn't burn it down, but I'd make it smaller. I'd find a way to utilize the teaching environments that we built, the huge high schools, because we've already invested in those, perhaps, but find a way to make those smaller environments different times, attendance times, things like that, flexible schedules, piling everybody into those big buildings at, 8 a.m. and getting them out of there at 3:30. And, it's meanwhile, the halls are crawling with too many people. You've lost control, basically. There's too many kids. It's too, it's trying to put the lid on the activity that's going to naturally happen. Things are going to leak out. The halls, when I was in high school, the halls were relatively empty. No one walked, out of their classroom and just wandered the halls. Now it's pretty customary. Students will disappear to the bathroom for 15 to 20. I mean, I
Yeah.
know that's happened before, but this will happen at least every class that I ever was substituting, and maybe sub behavior. But then when you look in the hall, there's no shortage of people hanging out in the corner, talking on a telephone, talking with each other, things like that. It's just incidents like that leak out of the sides. There's too many kids in that building at once. You cannot monitor them all. And that
But
becomes a
what
management
if,
problem. Yeah.
okay, so let's say that you have staggered start times.
We make it smaller, use less of the building perhaps, or separate the systems. Yep.
Okay, so you allow students into one section of the building to start the day. Maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours later, you start another section. And so now you
No,
have two parts of the building open.
we'd have like 2 classes a day for students. It wouldn't be a 6 class a day thing. And we'd
Oh,
incorporate all of the curriculum into those. Say you're a theater kid. Well, the theater wing and the band wing's always active, right? And they all know each other. I mean, they don't mind bouncing off each other, but they have a social, they have a certain purpose. They have a focused purpose. And then we get to the curriculum that way. Yeah, they come to school between 11 and 2, but early morning folks, maybe the swim team folks, they get there early because, swimmers, they're always swimming at like 4 in the morning. God bless them. So they get to school early and they get their core classes out. Or, maybe kids got a sport schedule. They practice a certain sport, go to a certain time of the
yeah.
day school, and then they go to the sport. So they're not all just, all right, the bell rang. Now we're all going to converge in the hall, which is insanity. And they all have to get to class on time. And then there's a few that aren't, the whole thing starts in with the massive population student management problems. And
But what about the
so now,
kids that
yeah.
what about the kids that aren't compartmentalized into band, drama, sports?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I hadn't thought about how many times you break it up because you could have different categories too. If you got a great computer science program in your school, oh,
Mm-hmm.
baby, God, there's tons of kids into gaming and coding and such like that. And if it's a project based sort of atmosphere, then you've got kids working perhaps at different days at different times on their projects and doing some at home, encourage
So,
collaboration outside of school, things
but
like
aren't you
that.
segregating them then?
Well, what I'm trying to do is break down the populations into smaller bits. I mean,
Right.
I'm not trying to separate anybody out for special treatment. I'm trying to make the
I'm not
environment more
saying that.
intimate for learning. So
I'm not
it's
saying
just
that. I'm just thinking that all I see
it's just a
in
suggestion
my
too.
little if all I see in my little hovel are the people that have the same interests as me, then I'm only going to hear about the same interests as me. And I
Well, you can
yearn to
say,
hear
yeah,
something else out there.
that's
And
happening in high
so,
school right now anyway. There's kids there that are alone amongst hundreds of other students. They're
right.
isolated. They have their own small little social group, totally isolated. They could give a if they were at the high school or not. Those kids. I mean, yeah, that's life. You need to expand your horizons. I'm just trying to look for a rich, more deeper experience in the education, not just, well, I had to take that class in fifth period. I don't really like to do it, but I got to. It's like, yeah, you should pick things you like to do and be able to do them in certain ways. And you know, and it's not
But
if
if you
everyone
don't
has the
like
same
math,
objective.
if you don't
Well,
like math,
yeah.
if you don't like writing, then that puts you at a loss.
Well, those are kind of skills that you have to use anyway. I'd like to think that
But
math
if I
gets
don't
stuck
like
in
that
there.
class, you just said if I don't like that class, I
Oh,
don't do it.
well, it's a project-based thing. Then as a teacher, you guide the student into incorporating some math that they've never learned before or need to stretch with to come up with their project. I mean, you can incorporate things that will address certain subjects, but you don't have to go to a class that's named that subject.
Okay.
I don't know how to do that. I mean, I'm not like when it comes to math, I am not literate enough to get that imaginative. However, as a human, I am certainly literate enough to find a friend and or resources that I can certainly use to help. Yeah, so that's what makes me a good teacher. Although I'd rather have another 3 or 4 ways to approach it with a student. That's what makes me not like teaching that subject so much, but I can try it. The other ones I'm pretty good with. I can usually get the kid go, oh, I get it in those terms. Yeah. So teachers have to work extra hard in this program. They'd have less students and in more intense relationships
Right. And I
and
think that
lots
they
more
would appreciate
resources.
that. And I think the
Yeah,
students would appreciate that more.
I think they would too. And
I
nothing
don't
says that
think,
the kid can't go onto somebody else's sort of time bar. I'm going to hang around and, I know the band folks get together for a couple hours in the afternoon. I'm going to hang out with them today. And it's okay with the teacher and things like that too.
well, I'm just wondering about how the community is going to take that because now you have all these kids who are kind of wandering around outside of school.
Right.
And so, but those
Yeah.
are the parents' problems. And a lot of
Yeah. I
parents are going
mean,
to say,
yeah.
that's not my issue. That's the school's issue.
But schools aren't
So you're going to
babysitting.
have to, there's going to have to be a whole transfiguration.
Oh, absolutely. We'd have to all wrap our minds around the solutions because it changes everything. We have to actually trust kids. They don't need to be babysat. I mean, let's face it. Schools are the way they are time-wise because it fits the schedules of the adults. I'm
Yeah.
going to work, they go to that. They're taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, yeah. And how ideal is that if you're trying to do it as a learning process? You're just sending them to that same babysitting system day after day and going, oh no, but it's an opportunity. Yeah, not when they don't have the context to understand any of that.
Well, I think it has more to do with the fact that schooling is compulsory.
Yeah. It just I mean it's necessary.
Is it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that an environment by which you can relax and learn, like you said, is necessary for a good life. And and certainly you don't know so much when you're young, so you need to learn certain things as you get older, like with through mentors and teachers. And if you don't, I think there's a lot of necessary pain and learning that you're going to miss out on. It's not easy to learn. You kind of have to force people to go through that process failure, process success. Oh, that does happen, things like that.
But you need to have that permission. And I think so
Yeah.
often we have parents who put so much stress on their kids that they have to do well. They have to do well. They can't
Yeah.
fail. You must have that high grade. You must be the highest achiever. You must, because they're all looking at where you're going to go to university.
Yeah. That's happening.
And
Yeah.
so, well, it's been happening for quite some time. I remember growing up and my parents would say, you got to start getting it all together. You're never going to get into law school like this. And I kept saying,
Law
who
school?
said I want to go to law school? I don't want to go to law school. No, you're going to go to law school. It's like,
Yeah.
no, 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 I don't want to go to law school.
That's a tiger mom Asian thing. Like, oh, look at my son, the doctor, my daughter, the engineer. It's like, what? Yeah. It's
So,
like, well, you want your kids to be taken care of. And I totally understand that. I'm a
yeah.
parent. But I also want my children to be relatively content in their lives. It's like, yeah, I feel I would do a great disservice if I was forcing my kids, to go to school to become a doctor or a professional of my choosing because I thought that's an excellent career. What's it got to do with me? Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of culture in it too. I mean, there's just certain cultures that really valued education and achievement, and some that are kind of like, yeah, kind of, sort of. And then there's this strain in America that goes, well, I'm not stupid. And they go off on some other side route and become phenomenal humans. It's like, well, not only are they not stupid, they're not even kind of playing by the rules, and I like it. I mean, they're just working hard, and they're smart, and they're lucky. There's a lot of luck to it, but holy cow, you go.
Well, what I find really interesting are these people who take everything that they hear in the media, online, or whatever, and they take it to heart, and it becomes gospel. And
it becomes
there's no, the critical thinking skills are gone, and many of these are teachers, and so they hop on whatever the popular bandwagon is, and then when they discover that they were wrong, they can't admit that. They cannot admit that at all. And
when you were talking about that, I thought about identity. It actually kind of becomes part of their identity.
It is part of their identity.
And so when you say, well, that's not a good thing or that's not a valid thing, they go, wait a minute, you're talking about me. No, I'm talking about this. No, you're talking about me because I believe so greatly in that. It's actually
is that a narcissistic trait?
It kind of takes the brain out of it. If you get the emotions all wrapped up in there, you can't negotiate emotions with logical thought. It's just not possible. Two separate sides of the human, And so when it becomes a part of your identity, you become emotionally attached to it. You will emotionally defend the heck out of it, regardless of whether or not it's worth, it's not valid. You don't look at it and go, well, are they right? Is that complete, utter BS? No, you just go, whoa, you're talking about me. You're not talking about how I teach or how this is taught. You're talking about me and what kind of person I am because my identity is wrapped up in that knowledge. Yeah.
But they become so enmeshed that if you disagree with them, you are the town imbecile.
Yeah, you have to with them.
Like, and you present them with facts and they say, what's your source? You have tons of sources, but they aren't the right sources. So they know exactly what they're doing. But then when they are discovered to be wrong, they still can't say anything.
I heard a phrase once, never underestimate the power of denial.
Never underestimate the power of the idiot.
Well, that's another thing altogether. There's theories, whole theories. We talked about that, the Baumhofer's theory of stupidity, which is literally, and it's not like a funny little thing. Like Murphy's Law. It's like literally research why people are stupid, why they choose to be stupid, why they choose to stay stupid. What it gets them, not much. It's like, wow. Yeah, it's weird. This is a whole new world. But stupid people are generally in kind of administrative positions. I didn't say that, did I?
Well, there are some people that believe that they are, they're zealots is what they are. And they aren't in a position of any real power in a sense. I mean, they are, let's say that they might be a classified position, a secretary, a teacher's aide, or something like that. But they try to push their agendas in on other people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really kind of interesting. And when you tell them that they need to back off a little bit, you can see the fire in their eyes that you
Mm-hmm.
have just trespassed. And so you know that you need to be worried about these
Yeah,
people.
you do. It is by my experience that I was almost always accused of being the enemy. So if I pointed out that something was a little bit too much or over the top, then the reaction was an overwhelmingly powerful one and
Mm-hmm.
unreasonable. I was labeled and named. It wasn't like, no, I disagree with you because of this. It's like, oh, I don't think so. Blah. And they came at me like nobody's business. And I went, wow.
It's
They told me,
very
you'll never
much,
say stuff like that again.
it's very much like, and I don't want to be accused of misogyny, but it's like the Mean Girls syndrome, where you cannot say anything bad about a certain clique of people. And I use Mean Girls because that was the movie
Yeah,
that
the Mean Girls
personified it,
model of human
or the
relationships.
Heathers,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
where they and their reactions in Heathers, they just killed you. Well, no, they didn't kill you. That one did. But yeah, they overreact to everything that happens and they put you down. But all that really does, in a sense, is shows their fragility
Yeah,
and
just
their
like in the Mean Girls.
inability
Yeah,
to
they
process.
could.
And
Yeah,
those are the people that I don't believe should be in education, because
exactly.
we
Yeah,
need to be able to talk to people and work with them and learn with them. If
yeah,
you are deriving some sense of joyful power and glee over the subjugation of children, and that transfers to your coworkers, then honey, you've got a problem.
well, and if
And
you got a group that doesn't have a cohesive cause for, but only a cohesive what we're against, that does
mhm,
not hold a group together.
no,
That they like the Mean Girls, they fight, there's infighting, but they stay together only because they dislike the same thing. They're focused on against the same thing, not really for anything, just against something. Yeah,
yeah, it's a hive mentality. um
yeah,
i
it's not
i
constructive.
well, I do remember early in my high school career of teaching high school, when I was working with this one group of students, and they were sitting in their desks, and they would come into the classroom and they wouldn't know where they were sitting every day because I would rearrange the desks. As soon as they left in the afternoon, the desks would change all around. Everything in the classroom would change around. And one day they looked at me and they said, why are we sitting like this? And I said, shh. And they said, why do you keep changing things? And I walked around the room and I looked at them and I said, because I like to walk around the room and you have to sit in those chairs. And I like to take a different path every day. And they said, that's not fair. And then after that, they started being able to move around and everything like that a little bit more. And we figured out what the best ways were. But, I mean, it was a
I
very
like that
packed
just because it
classroom.
keeps them on their toes. Like, well, this classroom's anything but boring, I'll tell you.
I
Yeah.
mean, having students design the curriculum in many ways. I had a group of, I think they were sixth graders. No, they were seventh graders. I had to teach seventh grade grammar. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
I had kids from, I think, 12 different countries. And so we had 10 different languages in the classroom. So in the morning, I would write sentences up on the board and I would tell them to get into their groups. And one student in the group would teach everybody else how to say that phrase and how to write that phrase in their language. And so everybody would do that. And if there was more than one language in that group, then they would learn everything else. And then they would come up and they would write them on the board. And then we would break it down by the structure of the language. What word meant what and where was it positioned in the sentence? And I looked at them and I said, now, does any of this make sense to you? And they're like, not really. And some of them were saying, well, yeah, because that's my native language. It does make sense to me. And so I think what we did with that was we were able to break free, and it made the kids understand that grammar is particular to a culture and that it helps you understand that culture just a little bit better with how things fall into place. And they had so much power with that they were able to, they wrote a book. And then they got everything together. By the end of the year, they were doing gangbusters. They did so well. I was so proud of them. But just being able to bring culture, just being able to bring in their little minds and have them grow and use their imagination in order to create something that had some, that was, it was thoughtful, it was provoking, and it was also germane to what it was that they needed to be learning. Right. And they learned
How
much
many students
better.
did you have? How many students in this class?
28.
Yeah. 28. Well, that's a fair sized class too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that for many years you taught in a smaller environment. That allowed both of us that freedom to kind of, because when you only had 12 kids at the most, it's like short but intense, small but intense group. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, that's the way I think it should be. The smaller the group, about 10, 12, 15 tops, you get to know everybody, you get a clear target in mind, and then you can really share with the students the lesson and they can contribute. There's not just screaming voices over. Things work much better.
Yeah, definitely.
Packed in a room. Yeah.
And everybody who wants to be there's there.
Yeah, and everybody has a reason to be there in some way, They have some investment. That's the thing that needs to be had with schools, is they need to be invested in both psychologically and integrally in society, and also shoes for money. We don't pay for schools. That's another story. We just want them to do what we want them to do, but we don't want to support them doing it. So
depends on who you're talking to. We do have these people who say, I do pay your salary.
Oh, and they do. It's not their fault that the money's not there, underutilized, I suppose. Right. Although there has been a great movement toward not liking to pay taxes. I've noticed that.
I don't think that's a movement. I think that has been a big rock.
Yeah, well, it started in the 80s and it got very successful, and they consolidated and changed budgets, and school districts ever since have been, in kind of little dire straits here and there all the time. So,
but schools go through budgeting cycles too of crises. I think they really like them, because I know that right now districts are looking at making major cuts.
Yeah.
And
unfortunately,
it's really interesting to see how many districts are cutting administrators, or how many of them are cutting teachers and not administrators. There are now debates out whether or not the teachers that have been there the longest should be the first ones to be cut and not the first ones coming in. But then we deal with, if that's the case, then I want you to think about ageism and how easy is it going to be for those people to pick up and move.
Yeah, and it's not. We've been basing it on population, and the population of districts ebbs and flows.
Yeah,
there's not as many kids from year to year, and then they short-sightedly build these gigantic buildings And I kind of worry about that.
Well, you have, since the pandemic, we have more and more families that are homeschooling.
Yeah.
We have more and more students who are doing remote learning. So it's the idea that kids need to go to a centralized location has changed, and it's changing even more.
That is very true.
And so I like your idea, but I think we need to incorporate a lot of the others in there. So, and I don't know how else we're going to say what we've learned, because I think we've talked about everything as if we actually understood what we learned.
I tried.
So, okay. Well, Philip, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony.
And we will be on a break because it is summertime. And the living is easy. So, until next time, keep your feet on the ground while reaching for the stars. We'll see y'all later. Okay, bye-bye, everybody.